In the last couple of weeks, around the time of the Kona Ironman Triathlon World Championships, we've seen the launch of a number of very radical new aero bikes. These are non-UCI-illegal, so they can't be used by professionals for time trials, but of course they're eligible for triathlon, and most importantly in the UK market you can use them in time trial events under the CTT regs. This bike behind me, the Ventum One, was the first of this new generation of non-UCI-illegal triathlon-specific bikes to hit the market. And it's the first one we've been able to get our hands on to test. What we were really interested to see was whether this bike could make good on its promises and use the opportunity of ditching the UCI rules, particularly of ditching half of its frame, to actually go faster. This is the one thing we're concerned with. It's what Ventum promise, and we're really keen to see how their wind tunnel tests and their claims translate to the road. Our test bike is the Ultegra Di2 model, although it came to us without wheels or saddle, so we could fit our own preferences. To that end, we fitted a Pro Logo Tagali saddle and a set of Zip 808 NSWs that happily we happen to have around. The Ventum One was conceived in late 2012 by pro triathlete Jimmy Sears and his father Peter. Both are engineers with a pretty astonishing CV. They've designed and made everything from classic cars to remote control aeroplanes, 10-spoke carbon fibre racing wheels, and even suspension for off-road military vehicles. Starting from a blank sheet, Ventum quickly arrived at what we're calling a Z-frame, this design here, which has ditched the downtube and the seat stays. Ventum told us that when they first took a prototype to the wind tunnel, it was so fast that the wind tunnel engineer himself didn't even believe the results. By the time development was complete, and Ventum were validating their final design in the wind tunnel and testing it against rivals, they say that it saw off the Canyon Speed Max, the Scott Plasma 5 and the Cervelo P5 in wind tunnel tests. The absence of the downtube is not simply to remove the drag caused by that tube itself, but to solve one of the biggest difficulties in translating wind tunnel data to the road. In a wind tunnel, the front wheel is fixed in place, meaning engineers are rather spoiled by having the luxury of completely controlled airflow from the front wheel onto the downtube, which is the most critical transition in the bike rider and wheel system. Of course, on the road, the front wheel isn't fixed and you're making constant small adjustments to maintain balance. So you have the effect of the front wheel kind of hosing air over the downtube, so that the way that the shape of the downtube picks up and handles that airflow is absolutely critical. Ventum tell us that with their bike, the airflow passing over the front wheel cleans up before it meets what is the bottom bracket seat tube area, and that as the yaw angle increases, so the angle of crosswind relative to your direction of travel, and also the bike speed, so their bike becomes even more efficient. As for the missing seat stays, leaving the incomplete rear triangle, ditching them saves drag, and Ventum tell us that the enormous chain stays on this bike are more than sufficient on their own to provide all the power transfer and handling stiffness required. Before I rode it, I wondered if the Ventum One might top the blue Triad SL as the flexiest thing I'd ever ridden. However, it only took a few hundred meters down the road to realize that wasn't going to be the case. Surprisingly, given how much of the frame is missing, the Ventum One is actually pretty stiff. It doesn't wallow around underneath you, and your initial expectations that it's just going to bend around all the time and that every pedal stroke out the saddle will have that bottom bracket swinging around like a pendulum, it just doesn't materialize. Clearly there's some very clever carbon fiber engineering gone into this bike. Don't be fooled into thinking that by removing 40% of the frame that the Ventum One is going to be lighter than a normal bike. Ditching these tubes requires significant reinforcing elsewhere. So actually this bike, built as you see behind me, weighs 9.8 kilos. That is a little on the heavy side by around a kilo or so for a top-end aero bike, and you do feel that going uphill. However, on the flip side, what's particularly interesting is that despite all of this reinforcing, the frame doesn't feel dead. The chainstays are absolutely enormous, yet the ride is actually pretty compliant. As a bike tester, I found the Ventum One absolutely fascinating to ride because it's sending back sensations that you just never felt before from any other bike, simply because there's no bike designed like this. For instance, the steering is responsive and accurate thanks to a stiff handlebar and fork. However, you do sense some flex, some shimmy in the bike when you do steer, and particularly when you change direction hard from one lean angle to another, because while the fork and the handlebar, the steerer tube, they're all transmitting your input faithfully, the top tube on its own can't really handle that kind of torsional load that you put through the bike in those extreme handling situations. And what you feel is that top tube just shimmy slightly. And it's quite an odd sensation. You don't really get that from other bikes. Something with an inadequate front triangle would flex in a slightly different way. Similarly, at the rear end, the power transfer is extremely impressive. For a bike with no down tube and no seat stays, when you really hoof it pretty hard, you're out the saddle, pulling on the bar, you can feel that the lateral stiffness in the chain stays is as good as the vast majority of TT and tri bikes. However, when you start to use more lean angle in the bikes, or honk it side to side, does anyone still say honk? Let's bring back honk. You start to use more lean angle, you get another sensation creep in. The lateral stiffness is there, but the torsional stiffness is not. Now that's the rear axle relative to the bottom bracket. So if you imagine, here's your crank axle, here's your rear axle. The rear axle is flexing like that because the chain stays can't support the rear wheel when you're putting that torsional load onto it. This becomes particularly noticeable when you can hear what you initially think is brake rub. It actually turned out to be wheel rub. The rim was rubbing against the chainstay of this $6,000 frame. That's a pretty expensive wear rate. The clearance is so tight between the chainstays, even for this wheel, which Ventum tell us does fit and is used by some of their athletes. When you put that sort of bigger lean angle into the bike, that bigger effort, the chainstays flex, the wheel moves in the frame, and the carbon fiber rim contacts the frame. So, how fast is the Ventum One? To find out, we put it into a time test ridden to power against a bike that we already know to be fast and have used as a benchmark previously, the Orbea Ordu M20i Limited. The Orbea is a UCI-illegal bike with a twin triangle frame. For the first part of our test, we went to a local club 10-mile time trial course on small unclassified roads in the countryside where there's very little traffic. It's a near triangular course, so wind conditions are pretty fair. We rode the bikes back to back within the hour to keep the weather conditions as close as possible, and they changed very little. Of course, we wore the same helmet, skin suit, shoes, and most importantly, we were riding with a power meter, a set of Garmin Vector 2 power meter pedals, which we swapped from bike to bike for consistency. And on this test, we rode each 10-mile time trial at exactly 301 watts. The Orbea got around the course in 23 minutes and 13 seconds. The Ventum got around the same course at the same power on the same day at 23 minutes and 20 seconds, 7 seconds slower. That's not a huge amount, but from Ventum's claims, we did expect it to be at least 7 seconds faster. A week later, we repeated this test at Castle Combe motor racing circuit, which is pan flat and extremely smooth. This time we were riding at 320 watts, and between the extra power and the smoother circuit, this created a slightly higher speed, and we were interested to see whether between the speed and the smoother surface, the absence of any kind of gradient, if this would benefit or hinder the Ventum. On this occasion, the Orbea got around the 10-mile test in 21 minutes and 46 seconds. The Ventum, at the same 320 watts, got around in 22 minutes and 10 seconds. This time it was 24 seconds slower. When we reported these findings to Ventum, they were disappointed, a little bit surprised because they simply thought they had the fastest bike. But to their credit, they took it on the chin, and they were also kind enough to say that they thought our test was extremely robust and that we'd controlled the variables sufficiently that they were very interested in our findings. They even went so far as to say that they plan on buying an Orbea Ordu themselves for their own back-to-back tests. So, is the Ventum One the outright fastest TT and tri bike in the world? No. On top of that, it does have a few flaws that would put us off recommending it. However, this is Ventum's first bike, and what we do know is that they're hard at work on subsequent models and further development on the Ventum One. We're going to be very interested to see where they go with it. For more great reviews of tri bikes, check out 220 Triathlon magazine. You'll find links in the video description.